What's up, my man? It's Johnny King. Thank you for tuning into this amazing episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. I'm stoked to have Sam Kabert in the house. He's a serial entrepreneur turned spiritual seeker, so we can talk everything from business to psychedelics and everything in between, which is why I'm so excited to talk. You're in my lane of interest. So, Sam, welcome to the show, man.
I love it. Thanks so much for having me, Johnny.
Yeah,
I'm
dude.
excited and pack all this with you.
Yeah, seriously, it was good to connect previously, obviously, and to connect to a mutual friend of ours. But um, seems like you've had quite the journey, a journey that similar to what I've been on in some regards, similar to what I feel like a lot of men are, where it's like we get into a life of where we think life is going to go, and then it doesn't go that way, or we're just not fulfilled in that direction. And I feel like a lot of men who are listening to this podcast would be like, yeah, it seems like everything on paper I should be happier than I am, but I'm not. And why don't you tell a little bit about your journey, if you will, just so people have a little context of who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate it. Well, yeah, my name's Sam Kabert. I grew up in California, Gilroy, California, garlic capital of the world. I've never
Yep.
actually lived outside the state. Now I think about it. But yeah, I went to school at Chico State, party school, Northern California, did the whole thing. And as I'm writing my book now about soul life balance, I'm kind of like revisiting some of the stuff that you're talking about, right? I mean, it's been my journey the past year 2.5 years or so of going deep down the spiritual rabbit hole. But now, like, kind of really looking at all the evolution, like putting the pieces together from when I was younger to college and everything. One point that I've always known was kind of a major defining moment was when I got DUI. I think I was 22 or 23. I forget at the moment now, but I remember going back to a campsite because we were camping at the time, like after coming back from, jail, and
Yeah.
there being someone saying, welcome to the club. And
Mm.
that just met me with so much disgust. And ever since then, I've had a major chip on my shoulder to just prove that I wouldn't be, a fuck up, for lack of a better way to put it. So that was when I was younger, like 10 years ago. I'm 33 now. And fast forward to probably 8 years after that, I was named one of Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 at age 31. I had just turned 31, moved back home to Silicon Valley, and the whole thing with business, content creation, all of it, the driving entrepreneurship, um, beating and surpassing all my goals, just kind of feeling more empty. So I would set out for another goal. And then finally in 2019, just this numbing depression of just like, this isn't enough. And then obviously, not obviously, but of course, this is common. There was a woman involved too, a relationship that was really toxic. So that kind of like really opened that put me in like that depression. But when I really sat with it, I got to see so much more, my own behavior and my own cycles and everything, and really just chasing a dopamine hit, like it's addict, right? It's addict behavior. Workaholism, that's a word, is addict behavior. And that's when I sat with ayahuasca and I had the most profound like awakening experience. And I even maintained that awakening type feeling for a couple months after seeing with the medicine. And now it's been about 2.5 years. And, there's been so much that's changed. Moved from Silicon Valley to beach town. I live a minute away, 60 seconds away from the ocean. Have a new podcast called Soul Seeker, and, a new coaching business on top of the
Cool.
first. So all kinds of stuff.
So cool, man. So
Yeah.
cool. It makes me think of I was having a conversation with some gal just recently, I forget who, and she's like, yeah, I keep meeting these guys who say, oh, they're super spiritual because they've done some ayahuasca and they've done, a bit of mushrooms, but they really haven't done the healing. They
Mm.
really haven't worked through their childhood, whatever, right? Um, what have you found in terms of that? Sounds like it was a defining moment. Certainly, you have several, especially also with the DUI and everything else. But because I want to come back to that, but as it relates to ayahuasca and stuff, what was one of, I'm sure, many, but what was one of the bigger kind of ahas that really shifted your perspective from where you were to a newer version shortly thereafter?
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, when working with plant medicine, especially ayahuasca, surrender is a big word, right? And I remember talking with a friend, and he was just talking about surrender, and I fully surrendered, everything. And one of the major downloads, there was obviously a lot, but it's that resistance creates pain, and we are always, not we, but myself at least, I was in a law of resistance. So just that surrender. And then from there, I just kept going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, and just became a student of spirituality. And I had already had my business up and running to a point where I was only working a couple hours a day, if you could even call it work. So I had I still do have plenty of time to explore these type of existential topics, and you know really being awake in the dream, and starting to question the nature of existence and all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm. What do you feel like drove you? Because I want to come back around to more of that conversation, but what do you feel like drove you to be the one of the 40 under 40s? That it sounded like you were really driven. You checked a lot of the boxes when you were younger, but what were you driven towards? Was it to
Right.
prove yourself? To what was it? Do you feel like that was really?
Yeah, I mean, it's external, like it was external validation so that I could have internal validation, right? And there wasn't that awareness and consciousness around it at the time. It was more just like, oh, I'm going to prove, I'm going to prove you, or I'm going to prove to myself, and I'm going to do this, and
Mm-hmm.
all that type of stuff. And it's great. I am so grateful for all of that, because that's what got me here today. And that's what allows me to have like this financial freedom to live this amazing lifestyle. So I'm extremely grateful for it. But it's just interesting, like, you know, sometimes I still think about it too, like, oh, should I stay in my first business, even though it doesn't completely resonate anymore, and just focus on me and do my thing? Or should I go through the struggle that is launching a new business? Because you forget,
Yeah.
and that's kind of where I'm at now, kind of like that in between, where the old business is, still going, but it's also taking away from my energy, even though it doesn't require much. But yeah.
And you say you forget. Do you forget how much effort it takes to get? Is that what you're saying? Like how much effort it takes to get a business up and running?
Yeah, there's that. And then also, this philosophy that I talk about, soul life balance, which we could look at that in terms of managing your relationship to masculine and feminine energies. And like I mentioned earlier, I alluded to, I should say, I was very much in the toxic masculine as it relates to my relationship to work and business.
Mm-hmm.
It's very toxic. And in the past 2.5 years, through doing the inner work, I've kind of done, a pendulum swing to the feminine side, and be in that flow. So soul life balance, like, that's really something that helps navigate to not be too much in the masculine or the feminine, but at the same time, like, that masculine drive and do, and like, I know how to do it so well, so it's easy for me to go, like, too far that way, and then yeah, that's not where I want to be.
When you say toxic, though, how is that showing up in
I
your
mean,
life, at least?
long hours working, right? Majority of everything that I'm doing is is centered around um what the business is all about, rather than, my connection to life outside of business, and my connection to soul and spirituality and everything else. It's just like kind of tunnel vision. And, in my humble opinion, I think that's toxic. And I don't think we're here on earth to run these businesses and to be working. That's the way our society is structured now. And I think a lot of us see that there's going to be some changes in years to come, but that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, it makes me think along the lines of, I mean, and I totally agree with what you just said. The whole idea of kind of that. soul, spirit, right? But soul, life balance, and the balance between masculine and feminine is that a lot of the ways that I feel like men especially, but certainly women too, but men especially design their lives based off of significance. And so it's working their way up the corporate ladder. It's all about kind of like a hierarchy, and it's ways, like you said, to kind of either prove to dad, prove to mom, prove to the haters, prove to ourselves that we are enough, which is why we have the status symbols, or we're doing the virtue signaling. But at the end of the day, it's so empty,
Mhm.
really, right? And so I love the kind of the conversation around the transition from maybe a life of acquisition where you're really looking to look like how much can I get, you know, to really transitioning to a life of impact and giving, right?
Right.
Which is really where the juice is. It's really where and for us to be having these conversations when we're quote unquote younger versus figuring this out in our 60s or 70s or later on in life, which is, I have these conversations with my dad as he's kind of figuring it out later on in life. I'm just grateful to be like, okay, cool. This is really what life is about. Because obviously we don't get to take any of this shit with us when we're gone from
Right.
this existence, right? So a little bit of and I've talked about on my podcast, just even on solo episodes of my own journey with mushrooms. I haven't done ayahuasca, although I'm kind of hoping to do that in the first quarter of next year,
Nice.
in Costa Rica or South America. It's like when I've had that, I've experienced love. I've experienced things have nothing to do with the car or the money or that, right? It's like
Yeah.
such a different way our brain connects. But how is that? How did that take you out of that place of you said 2019? You were kind of in the depths of
Yeah.
kind of depressive thought.
Well, so actually it started with breath work, to be honest. I did breath work for the first time a week or two before doing ayahuasca. And when I say
Cool.
breath work, I'm not talking about box breathing or alternate nostril breathing. I'm talking about transformational breath. And it's kind of a confusing brand because CrossFit's kind of like a brand or franchise, whatever it
Yeah.
actually is. I'm not a CrossFitter, but like most people think of breath work, if we're talking about a deep dive of breath work, as like Wim Hof holotropic breath work. This is called transformational breath, and there's facilitators probably wherever you may live. You could just Google it, and it's like an actual style that people go through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was life changing for me. I literally felt reborn. And I mean, it's wild because you're just breathing, no medicines included, for about 60 minutes, I believe. And through that, I actually thought I was dying. It was my first time doing
Interesting.
anything like that. Like
Wow.
my cousin has epilepsy, so he has seizures a lot, and I've never seen anyone have a seizure. But I felt like I was having a seizure and I was going to die. And when this isn't typical, by the way, I should say.
Yeah.
Um, and the facilitator helped me breathe through it and everything, and it literally felt like a rebirth. I still had gone and done ayahuasca a week or two after that. Um, but from that experience alone, like a massive heart opening, it just was so profound. And then with ayahuasca, I forget exactly what your question was because I went down a little rabbit hole.
No, it's all good. But rather than even circling back around, it makes me think, having listened to a couple of Aubrey Marcus's
Mhm.
podcasts where he talks about, like, maybe venturing away from psychedelics because of how much you can connect with breath, just through that
Right.
experience, just through breath alone is pretty cool. Which I just want to open that up because it doesn't mean this is definitely a hot topic that we're talking about in terms of mushrooms or ayahuasca or DMT or whatever. And yet there's also other ways of doing it through breath work, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, the most important thing is integration, right? Like that's the most important thing. And there's a lot of people that say the right things.
Right.
Medicine is just the taking the medicine part. It's 10%. All the real magic unfolds in the integration, but it's more than just saying that. It's living that way. And something that's been alive with me recently is looking into creating like an integration retreat. And there's all kinds of different retreats you can go on, whether it's a yoga retreat or it's a medicine retreat or vipassana darkness retreat. There's all kinds of things. But what I haven't seen is any sort of retreat that is specifically about integration. Like, hey, we're coming together, we're bringing in top facilitators to help actually give you the tools and teach you the tools to do on your own. Because a lot of times in medicine ceremonies, it's kind of like, okay, well, now go integrate. Here's some information about how to integrate, and you're off on your own for the most important part, you know?
Explain that to, but for guys that this is all a very new topic to them.
Totally.
They may not even know what integration is. What is that for the guy that's hearing this for the first time?
Yeah. So whether you're doing mushrooms or ayahuasca or even breath work, whatever it may be, it's a peak experience, right? So coming from that peak experience and going back into your normal life can be beyond disorienting. It can be earth shattering. It can cause you in downward spirals, or it can get you to these points of these feelings of what's the point, all that type of stuff. So the idea is to integrate these peak experiences into your everyday life to help you make the changes, because we aren't just, doing breath work to chase the high of, oh, my body is vibrating and my heart is opening. And in this moment, I feel great, but then I'm going to get mad at the car on the road and have some road rage later. Because what's the point if you're not integrating into your daily life? So there's so many different ways to include practices to help you make sense of these peak experiences. And just a few off the top of my head, breath work is one. It can also cause a reactivation, which a reactivation means it might put you back in that place. So maybe that's not the best. Journaling is a great way to express what's going on within you, especially if you don't even know and you just keep writing and then things just start to come out. That's really powerful. One of my favorite practices is earthing, which is just simply walking around outside barefoot and connecting with the earth. You can sun gaze, kind of a hard time depending on where you are, since we're entering winter soon. There's all kinds of stuff, meditation, obviously, even reading. We were talking before we started about how we both have dogs. Aubrey Marcus's last Fit for Service Summit I went to, there's always eye gazing, but eye gazing is like a practice of looking into really the soul of another person and just connecting with them. And I was joking with a friend that I was eye gazing with my dog. But the truth is, like, when you look into the eyes of your pets, especially dogs, like, it releases oxytocin. So it actually helps you feel better. So there's all types of little ways. It doesn't have to be like, quote unquote, doing the work to check off the boxes of, oh, I did my meditation, I did my journaling, and now I'm going to do XYZ. It's kind of just like, oh, what feels right in the moment now.
And I'm glad you say that, because I think that circles back around to what I was saying before, where there are, I certainly have come in contact with men who think just checking off the boxes of, oh, I did my ayahuasca, I did ayahuasca, or I did some mushrooms, or like that, these, because you do, like you said, the 10%, then the rest of the 90% is just going to take care of itself.
Right. Yeah.
Which is so not true. Right. That's really where the work, where the rubber meets the road and the work begins. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, it's really relevant to have this conversation, because just, being able to flex and say, oh, I've done these things, doesn't mean that, you've necessarily made the progress, excuse me. And the motivation that has, excuse me, got something caught in my throat. Hang on. You got to be able to come from a place of like genuine, like earnest desire to grow, to put in the work, versus just like thinking you're going to put the time in and that's going to make the difference. Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So I think that makes a big part of it, part of the difference, I think, in the journey. towards growth and healing, which is what a lot of this podcast and what I talk about is all about. Because you can never get to the point of true fulfillment in life, especially as a guy, if you have unresolved generational childhood trauma, anything from the past that is keeping you from really connecting with a deeper version of you or a deeper version of a relationship or a life purpose and all that stuff. So anyways, I digress.
But it's hard to discover that stuff. We can know that, right? But then it's kind of like, well, how do you access that, right?
I think that's, yeah, the how to access is the larger question, right? And then how to actually have the support, because a lot of times I feel like men want to do it on themselves, by themselves. Like you talk about having a facilitator or a buddy or a coach like you to help do the implementation. The integration is really where I feel like we can check our egos at the door and surrender to a process of opening up. And that's fucking scary, I think, for a lot of guys who haven't really opened up to anyone, right? They haven't
Mhm.
felt safe in any relationship, even in a relationship with themselves, not to mention someone else. So how do you go about, maybe guys listening to this and he's like, okay, this is intriguing, but
Right.
like this is a big leap, sometimes for guys who are just starting the practice. How do you work guys into just
Yeah.
the journey of
I
growth and healing?
I totally get it. After I first did ayahuasca, like within 6 months, or I don't remember the time frame, but it was a while ago. I used to call myself a recovering bro. So I don't really say that too much anymore. I forgot about that, but definitely very like meathead broy before and not so much anymore. And for me, yoga was a big start before ayahuasca even. And I was a big listener of Rogan, and he talks about doing yoga. And I remember doing yoga in college and getting made fun of by my friends. So Rogan has been a pioneer in terms of like getting in touch with your feelings. Yeah, he still can say some things that are questionable, whatever, but let's look at what he is doing. And there's so many of us men that look up to him as like a manly man. It's like, oh, well, if Rogan is talking about like doing yoga, or, he talks about his feelings, like he's cried on the podcast, not often, but he has, like, it's like, oh, it kind of lets you have that permission slip, if you will. So for me, like, it was kind of finding those mentors like yourself too, and if people are listening to your podcast, then they're listening to the right and surrounding themselves with the right people. Because if you are just surrounded by toxic behavior, then it can be very hard. But yeah, I think for me at least, like breath work is key. So in terms of like all this, where to find an entry point, um, it may be hard to go to a yoga class because you aren't quite there or something like that, right? I totally get that. I was there. But breath work something you can do on your own at home. You can watch a Wim Hof video on YouTube where he leads you through an 11-minute breath work practice, and that's a good start. And that's going to bring up emotions and opening your heart. And that something like that would be good because you're in the privacy away from people, if
Yeah,
you're not
yeah.
wanting to be seen.
Totally, totally. And we talked about this, prior to hitting record, and even on the phone earlier. I've been working with Christine Hasler this year, and I bought her and Stephanos's program on breathwork and meditation, and she initially started really helping me with just getting out of this feeling of apathy and numbness, which is really the byproduct of a huge amount of repressed anger, you know.
Mm.
And so in their breathwork and meditation course, which I highly recommend, I think you can find it anywhere on christinehasler.com. But and that's, I don't get any money for that pitch. She's amazing. They're both amazing. But I did find, and I honestly, I went into like, okay, cool. I'm in the Dr. Joe Dispenza meditation. I'm totally up for breath work. I'm like, like what's the big deal behind breath work, right? It wasn't until I started doing that program and Steph was leading, he leads you through breath work for grief or stagnation or fear or, apathy, any of those things, that I started recognizing how, oh, there's a method to his madness here. And certain breath work, uh, either it would kind of push me towards hyperventilating, which made me scared, and that
Mhm.
brought up certain feelings, or it would push me towards a breath work that would actually crack me open to start crying. And that was like, again, all in the safety of my own room with the door locked, with my eye mask on. It was very safe. And it has continued to be a really, really powerful experience just by myself, which is what, and I say that just because I do want guys to think they don't have to go flying down to Costa Rica. They don't have to go to South America. There are a lot of things, like you said, you can just find on YouTube just as a beginning stage, right? Because there's also guys maybe similar to you and I, and those that are doing so much more work that are listening. They know what integration means. They know what shadow work is. They know kind of what the soul opening, deeper work requires. And there's value in this conversation as well. But I'm glad we talked about that, because breath work is really, really powerful. Now, are you trained in this at all yet?
No, but you never know, right?
Yeah.
No, I could see that. I'm actually going to Costa Rica in a week at the time of this recording to
Nice.
do a yoga teacher training, but
Cool.
same thing.
Cool.
I have no intention to like start teaching yoga. It's just for my own development.
Yeah.
I would love to go through a breathwork training program if for just my own development. You know what I
Me too.
mean?
Totally. Me too.
Yeah.
um, Going back to something that I read about you, you talked about like you were open to conversation about all things spiritual, whether it be uh, extraterrestrial and multidimensional. Um, Maybe we can talk about either one of those, because I think those are kind of fascinating, as I've just started to kind of dabble as well. When you're talking about extraterrestrial, you're talking about other worlds, other life forms, correct? Or am I
Yeah, I
wrong?
mean, it's kind of like a respect thing. I say alien, the word alien a lot. I try to say extraterrestrial, and depending on who I'm, the demographic I'm speaking with, I'll just say alien, whatever. It's kind of like a thing, but the other like word that people have been saying in the community that's into aliens and things like that is multi-dimensional beings. But yeah, I got really into ETs, aliens, whatever you want to call it, right after I did ayahuasca, pretty much, because I went down the human origin story, and there's an amazing show on Gaia by Greg Braden. It's called Missing Links.
Mm.
It's excellent. I highly recommend it. That kind of got me started on the path. And then really for like a long time, I was really into the human origin story, all things aliens and things like that.
Mm.
And I'm just kind of like now in the season of more practical stuff and grounding and getting back into like the 3D experience. That's just the season I'm in now. But it's funny because around the time of first going down this path of like aliens and whatnot, things started to show up in my life. And one simple example is I was in Aubrey Marcus's mastermind for 2 years. I guess I'm still in it now. We just finished our last summit of the year. But yeah, last year, the first year I was in it, I was driving to Tahoe for a summit we had, and it was around the time of the fires near Santa Cruz, and that's where I live. My parents live in Gilroy, close by. My dad sent me a picture because he was going through stuff in his house in case they needed to evacuate due to the
Mm.
fires, and it was a picture of an alien necklace that he found in my little kid stuff. And I go, oh, that's weird. I don't even remember that. Okay, cool. And then I started thinking about how like I don't remember, but my dad always told me as an adult, I used to say, like, you're not my real dad. I'm from the planet Zotar and all this type of stuff. So and those memories came up. And the next day at the summit, this woman who channels, which is like receiving information from light beings or beings in other dimensions or even their own higher self, said, I have a channel message for you, and that you're not from this planet. And I go, oh, cool. Nice. Yeah. I'm pretty well aware, but thank you. And I was like, huh, the synchronicity of that from the day before, just seeing this alien necklace. And then another friend goes, "Oh, we should," because there's all kinds of different kinds of aliens, right? And channelers have told me I'm very like connected to the Arcturians. It's from the planet Arcturus. And if this other friend goes, "We should Google what the Arcturians look like." And if you Google it, they say they're blue and a certain, look, whatever. This necklace was of an alien with a blue head, which, like, how often do you even see aliens that aren't green? So just all those synchronicities were just like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And then I had a amazing UFO experience about less than 6 months after that. But that's it's just kind of like a thing I'm into. And if there's any specific questions you have, let me know. But that's kind of like the background.
Well, I've done a couple of podcasts, solo podcasts with myself. I did one with my cousin when amongst other topics of conversation, we both talked about when we were at a summer camp and we saw UFOs in the sky as we were all
Nice.
falling asleep, and we were like, "What the fuck?" And I remember we were only probably 7 or 8, but we all knew, like, the hair on the back of my neck can still stand on end when I think about it. Like, holy shit! And then even going to a bunch of Dr. Joe Dispenza's retreats over this past year, and them talking about these blue beings that come and heal, and that are a lot of this. Again, if you're listening to this and you haven't done any
Yeah,
of
it
this work,
sounds
you're gonna
crazy.
be like, yeah, you guys are fucking, what are you smoking, right? But and the more I'm just saying, I remember hearing about it, I'm like, okay, that sounds really trippy, but I'm just gonna stay open to it. And then, like you said, the synchronicities of things be like, that's so crazy that you mentioned that, because I heard this the other day, and you start connecting dots. It's like, this is really, really interesting. All that to say is I feel like there is something else on a higher plane than where we're at humanly, that is kind of guiding, if you
Hmm.
will, at
Yeah.
times. And uh, whatever you make of it, that's, again, to each their own. But I do feel like it's a cool conversation that I always love talking about, especially when it comes to aliens, and certainly have um, listened to and read a bunch of stuff. But I'm gonna have to check out, would you say, missing links on Gaia, right?
It's not specifically about extraterrestrials. It's about like the missing chromosome in the evolution of humans from Neanderthals, essentially. And he does not once say anything about ETs. It's just like that kind of opened up my eyes to it. That was like the gateway. And then there's for where you're at, Drunvalo Melchizedek. Does he ring a bell?
Nothing.
He's got a book called The Ancient Secret of Flower of Life, which is incredible. And Spirit Science, a YouTube channel, I think they have like 1 million or 2 million subscribers or something. They're a big YouTube channel. They have a video on there called The Human Origin Story that goes even deeper. And there's so many resources. Obviously, Stephen Greer, he's got a few films. His one last year was good, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind.
Yeah, I did see that too. I did see that
Yeah.
too. Well, you're already actually answering some of my latter questions, which would be, what books or resources would you recommend? So I'm already actually taking some notes, and I'll put them in the show notes for guys that are wondering, where
Hmm.
to click into some of the stuff. And if you haven't heard of Gaia, for those of you that are listening, it's like personal development, but on a more spiritual level, if you will. And so I think that's something, definitely. It's like a Netflix for spirituality, which is pretty sweet. But
That's what I was thinking in my head. So you read my mind,
yeah,
telepathy.
yeah, I gotcha, I gotcha. Well, what are you working on now? Like, what's the next kind of thing that you're working on? I know you've talked about like offline, your Clone Yourself University. What are all the things that you're working on with clients, coaching clients, or just for yourself? What's the next thing on the radar for Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. My big thing right now is Soul Life Balance, this book I'm writing. It's going to be my fourth book.
Mm,
The first three books I wrote, all three of them within a year, and it was just kind of like they just kind of came through me. And it was
wow.
that toxic masculine I was talking about, where it's just
Yeah.
like, this one, those were kind of more for my ego, and I didn't know it at the time. Whereas this one I've been working on for 2.5 years, and this is like a work that I'm really proud of. So I'm taking my time, but it should be published around January or February. And then I have a new offering called Wizard Teams, which is super exciting. My coaching business, Clone Yourself. I teach entrepreneurs how to scale their business with virtual assistant teams. And that's something I've been doing for 2 years.
Mm.
And that's exactly how I scaled my first business. So passing it on. Wizard Teams takes that to the next level where it's like, hey, a lot of people, and I learned this through coaching, they don't really want to do the work. They just want it done for them. And that's what we do with Wizard Teams. You just tell us what you want done in your business, and we take care of the rest. So we do the recruiting, the hiring, the training, and the managing of virtual teams.
Mm.
So entrepreneurs can really grow their business, get themselves out of their business, and outsource more tasks without having to worry about building a team. We do all that for you. So I'm pretty stoked about that. And yeah, I got this yoga teacher training. So who knows what's going to happen after that, right?
Yeah, when you sit down for dinner with someone, you're like, what do I even ask you about, Sam? Like, you got so many different stuff going on and so many different, you know,
I, I
lines here. It's pretty fun.
I'd start doing this series called Brochuality, where I take broy type movies and I break them down to show hidden spirituality meanings, and those have been fun. I've only done 3 or 4, just a few, but I did do a 60-minute review of the movie Soul that goes deeper on it and really explains all the things that a lot of people wouldn't catch, and then provides a ton of resources and links to go deeper on certain themes. So yeah, I mean, all kinds of weird stuff, right?
That's so cool. There's
Yeah.
there's a lot in that. I've seen that twice. Such
Yeah.
a good creative movie, but yeah, there's so much I'm sure I'm missing. What were some of the other bro movies that you're referring to?
The first one I did was Old School. That scene at the end when Will Ferrell is in the debate and then he like blacks out. What I'm talking about, like
Yeah.
as channeling. And then basketball, where there's some scene where he's in the car and like the music that's coming on, like the lyrics like are directly speaking to him. So like spirit guides.
Mm,
I did one on White Men Can't Jump, just showing like toxic masculinity.
mm.
And I'm waiting to do Bill and Ted. Bill and Ted's like one of my favorite movies, and there's so much in there. So I didn't want to force it
Yeah,
because
it's got to
that'll be a good
take some
one.
time. Yeah, that'll be a really good one. I
Yeah,
love it. I love it. Well, there's definitely. I'm glad you brought up some of the clone yourself and the wizard teams, because I feel like even just personally, I'm like, okay, we need to talk more after after we stop recording here, because there's some good things that I think you could certainly support me on. So if
absolutely.
there's such a breadth of conversation that we've had, and I think this is just the first of multiple, you know, conversations we'll have on the podcast. But for those that you have piqued their interest on any of these areas of conversation, how can they connect with you? What's like the next step of like, okay, I want to know more. I'm intrigued to follow up on this. Where can they find you?
Yeah, luckily it's easy to find me. There's not many Kaberts in the world. So you just go to samkabert.com, KAB as in boy, ERT. All the links to my social media are there. So you can contact on the forum or connect on Instagram, all the LinkedIn, if you're the LinkedIn person, and all the pieces to my various pieces of content are laid out there as well. So appreciate you having me on, Johnny.
Yeah, dude, for sure. Where does Kabert come from? Do you know your heritage at all?
Yeah, so my great grandparents came here from Lithuania, and at Ellis Island they shortened the town they were from in
Mm.
Lithuania from Kabarski to Kabert, and gave them the last name. But I don't remember. I should ask my dad again what their last name was before that, because
Is
it's a
that funny?
town.
Yeah, is that funny? Because I feel like that I've heard that story a lot, where things changed once they came over,
Right.
and just completely, they're like, that sounds too difficult. We're just gonna give you this name, and they're like, okay, I guess
Totally.
they're
The
right.
weird thing is it comes from the town though. It's not even like their like our actual last name, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's fascinating. Well, thank you, brother. Thanks for being
Cool.
on. Thanks for sharing your gifts. Like I said, there's so much more we could probably dive into. I feel like this is the 101 conversation, and then next time I'll have you on, we'll go to 202, go deeper, and keep going from that. But I think it's a good foundation for guys that are just wanting to kind of explore, all the things that you've been through the last several years, and are just opening themselves up to, like, okay, life isn't quite working out like I thought it would, or it's not as meaningful or fulfilling as I thought it would. So you've really touched upon some good hot topics, I feel like. So thank you for being on and for sharing, man. It's good stuff.
You got it, Johnny. Appreciate it,
Awesome.
brother.
Awesome, you bet. Thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Becoming Kings podcast. Like I said, I'll throw down a bunch of the stuff that he mentioned with Gaia and the books and resources into the show notes. But as well, I would say follow Sam, hit up his website, follow him on social media, because he's doing some exceptional things, and I'd say that it's definitely worth a follow and to dive in on all the good stuff he's got going on. So until we meet up with you guys on the next episode, thanks for joining me. We'll catch up soon. Cheers.